Hello, I'd like to welcome Tom Halliwell with a presentation on building high-performing project teams. Tom Halliwell is currently serving as a Director, Global Program Leaders for Oncology franchise of IPSEN in UK, where he provides effective project leadership of the global development team to deliver high-quality projects and programs on time and within budget. Tom has broad knowledge and experience base covering key operational disciplines and all phases of development. Over to you, Tom. Welcome.
Thanks. Well, it's great to be with you. So today I'm going to be talking about building high-performing project teams. So I've been fortunate enough to work on a number of what ended up being world-leading diagnostics and pharmaceuticals, including Herceptin and Avastin. Before I get into the topic in a bit more detail, I have, if this will move forward, a disclaimer and some disclosures. So the views that I'm giving are mine and not necessarily shared by IPSEN or the Pharmaceutical Industry Project Management Group. And I've also included some disclosures there. Just a few words on the Pharmaceutical Industry Project Management Group. For those of you who are not aware of the group, we've basically been going for 35 years. It was formed by a small group of project leadership, project management professionals. Basically, they used to work together in a company, then they moved elsewhere but stayed in touch. And they became a little bit disillusioned by the lack of a forum for pharmaceutical project professionals to share best practice, share knowledge, talk about topics of interest. And so they decided to form their own group. And so 35 years later, it's still going. It's a not-for-profit organization run by volunteers from the industry like myself, hold regular meetings. And if you want more details, you can go to the website. And also just a few words about IPSEN, again, for those of you who don't really know the company. So we're a mid-size biopharma company. We're focused on oncology, rare disease, and neuroscience. And we also have a consumer health business. We've been established since 1929, and total sales last year were 2.5 billion euros. And we have 4 key R&D centers, Paris, Oxford, UK, where I'm based, Cambridge, US, and Shanghai. We've got about 6,000 employees. So today, what I thought I would do is, in this brief presentation on building high-performance teams, I thought I would steer clear of the usual suspects. So I'm sure we've all been on high-performance team courses or team development courses and done team assessments. And there are many models and tools that usually appear in those sessions. But I thought it'd be more helpful for you, for me to concentrate on a number of things that tend to get less airtime, because I think that's going to be really of more value to you. But I think it's just worth mentioning a few of the more familiar items for those of you who are perhaps a bit less familiar with them, so that if you want to go away and look at them, then you can. So all the courses and assessments that I've been involved in always involve Bruce Tuckman's teamwork theory model. It's the 4 stages from the formation of a team all the way through to what potentially could be a high-performing team. All the assessments, again, that I've been involved in involve some form of psychological assessment based on the psychology of Paul Jung. You may have come across the Myers-Briggs type indicator, or you may have come across the more recent Insights color wheel. And finally, you usually find that Belbin's 9 team roles will crop up in most of those assessments. So again, I'm not going to go into any detail, but I've included a source at the bottom of the slide so that if you're interested, want to know more detail, you can go away and find out detail. So normally I find a good place to start when I'm talking about something is with a definition. And I'm sure we're all familiar with the concept of project teams, but what specifically about high-performing project teams. What is different about high-performing project teams? What are the criteria? Well, let's start with a definition. So basically, perform will be to carry out, accomplish, or fulfill an action, task, or function. And I think we probably all come up with that definition ourselves. But there's also something in there about how well it's done, how successful it is. And I think that provides the bridge to the high bit of high performance. So high is a long way above a person or thing. It's greater than normal. It's notable or successful moments. So I think that gives us a little bit more insight into what high performance is, but how do we actually recognize that? Well, I think in some areas such as sport, it's actually relatively easy for us to identify some high performing teams, and teams that consistently do better than other teams. And one example, and apologies if you don't support this particular football team, but the Liverpool football team has been very successful over the last few years in it, winning in fairly close succession the Premier League, the Champions League, and the Club World Cup. So I think there's a lot of success there, isn't there? And this is where I will bring up my definition of what high-performing team is, and I've pulled this together from numerous other definitions. So it's a group of people who share a common vision and goals, and who collaborate, challenge, and hold each other accountable to achieve above average to outstanding results. And I think even people who support other teams would ultimately accept that this is a high-performing team, that the Liverpool football team has been high-performing over these last few years. But ultimately, that's all very well, but how does this translate into the pharma industry? How easy is it for us to recognize high-performance teams? What criteria do we use to judge that? We work in an industry that has a very high failure rate. Are we judging success by a team that delivers a very successful drug all the way to market? Or do we say that a team that actually terminates a project, or is regarded ultimately as an unsuccessful project, could they be a high-performing team? So what criteria are we using to judge what a high-performing team is? And I think let's explore some of these questions. So does your organization know what a high-performing team looks like? And I think most organizations can point to teams that are working well together and are actually getting stuff done. And that is clearly also true of high-performing teams, but it really only scratches the surface of what a high-performance team really does look like. And what does really set a high-performance team above the rest? What makes it stand out as being a high-performing team? Well, if you look at the research and my own experience of working in quite a number of teams, successful teams in many organizations, would also agree with this list. These are the sort of key features of how you would recognize a high-performing team. It's a team that has a clear vision, that the teams have clear goals. They're linked to the team and organizational priorities. They can communicate clearly with each other and others, and they have very positive relationships within the team. They're able to successfully manage conflict. Obviously, there is healthy conflict in teams. They trust and respect each other. They have defined roles and responsibilities. They're skilled at identifying and solving problems. They're effective at decision-making. They celebrate success, and they practice continuous learning. So it's great to have this list because it enables us to not only identify high-performing teams, but also enabled us to help teams that aren't high-performing to become high-performing. But of course, it'd be simple if this was the complete picture, wouldn't it? But of course, there are many other team factors, organizational factors, and environmental factors that ultimately affect project team performance. And there's a few that I particularly want to highlight. So the first one is ultimately team size. So one factor that, for me and my experience, has a significant impact on project team performance is project team size. And if you look at the PMI Pulse of the Profession report from last year, they did some research and they found that the average number of core team members in a low complexity project team was 8. And in a high complexity project team, it was 24. Now, these numbers to me make it abundantly clear that most organizations are either ignorant of or are ignoring the very clear research on team size and the negative impact that having a suboptimal team size will have on the performance of the team. And if we look back to the work of Ringelmann, who was a French agricultural engineer, he discovered actually back in 1913, when he was doing some work with groups, that there was a tendency for individual members of a team to become increasingly less productive as the size of that group increases. And he did a very famous rope experiment. And what he found is that as he added more people to the rope, ultimately, although the total force generated rose, as you would expect, the average force exerted by each group member declined, as you can see from this particular graph here. And he came up with this concept of social loafing, where a group tends to hide the underperformance of others. And, you can see here that, beyond about 5 people, the really law of diminishing returns when it comes to effort. As you get beyond 8 people, you're seeing less than 50% effort. So that's not particularly good. And this is borne out really by some recent research by Jennifer Mueller. She's an associate professor at the University of San Diego School of Business. And she again confirmed Ringelmann's work that indeed larger teams, people perform less well in larger teams. But she also provides some useful additional insights. So she says that basically project leads of teams tend to want to overstaff their teams. That's just a general phenomenon that she's observed from researching this. But also she concludes that the losses that occur in performance in larger teams is less to do with the increased complexity of the coordination and more to do with the lower quality of the relationships that people are able to develop in larger teams than in smaller teams. So in my experience, what tends to happen is that project teams increase in size over time. So they may start out in line with company guidelines in terms of core team membership and core team numbers, which from my experience tends to be in the sort of 6 to 12 people range. But over time, pressure can get exerted from senior functional managers who were not happy in the first place about their function not being on the core team. They put pressure on the team to add them, or the team itself decides that actually they're at a stage where a particular function should be part of the team. And over time, that number begins to tick up into the 20s. And then there might be periodic culling of the team where either for underperformance reasons or new models brought in, that the numbers get culled back. But it's, that is a concern that tends to happen, and there's a drifting in increasing numbers over time. But ultimately, is there an optimal team size? From research, can we say what the optimal size might be? Well, Jennifer Mueller, she definitely says it's 6. That's her conclusion from her research. But Evan Wittenberg, who was formerly director of the Wharton Graduate Leadership Program, he states that while the research on optimal team size is not conclusive, it generally falls in the 5 to 12 range, but the majority is in the 5 to 9 range is the best. But there are, as he admits, a number of people who come out saying that 6 is the optimal number. My final example would be Jeff Bezos, who's CEO and founder of Amazon. So he basically states that no matter how big your company is, if you can't feed the team on 2 pizzas, it's too large. And from that, he means that it's got to be less than 5 people. And his logic is quite simple as to why this is the case. He says more people means more of everything, more coordination, more bureaucracy, more chaos, everything that slows things down. So his argument, and it's still the case today for him, is that you've got to have a team of less than 5 people to be successful. But of course, again, building high performance teams is more than just one issue, but clearly project team size is an important factor. But if we go back to this list that we presented a few slides back, I haven't got time today clearly to go through all of these, but there are some groupings that I think it would be useful just to quickly talk about. Camaraderie or positive team relationships is key to developing high performance teams. It's really important that the teams get on well together, and it doesn't mean that they become best friends and are socializing every evening or the weekends. That's not ultimately what it's about. It's about developing trust and good relationships with each other that enable the team to work and perform well, because ultimately that is what it's all about. It's about developing those easy and productive relationships, because only then, when you develop those positive, trusting relationships where it's easy to have a team meeting and you're all comfortable with each other, can you begin to communicate effectively, question authority, solve those problems, negotiate conflict, assist one another, and work together effectively. And one of the benefits of that camaraderie is the accountability that comes with that. That people, when they feel that sense of camaraderie together, that they're all in it together, and that they're all working together and supporting each other, they then feel that sense of accountability not only to the project, but obviously ultimately to the team for delivering. And that's really important. But obviously one of the key things behind all of that is trust. Trust is critically important to developing that camaraderie. And I haven't worked in a team where it's been high performing, where there hasn't been a very high level of trust. And ultimately it's about being trusted. It's about being trustworthy. And just coming back again to that list, obviously time is ticking away here, but there's another category that I thought, from my experience, is incredibly important. And again, I'm grouping some of these things together, and it also ultimately it's about having those goals front and center of high performing teams, because without that connection, it's really hard. Without that unified purpose, it's really hard to have a high performing team. And that really is called out quite clearly in the definition of a team, which Katzenbach and Smith put together, which is a small number of people with complementary skills who are committed to a common purpose, set of performance goals and approach for which they hold themselves mutually accountable. So goals, getting everybody on the same page is really, really important for a team to be successful. And the team isn't going to be successful unless it's all aligned and everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet. So ultimately, you do need to link, in my experience, the goals process with reward. There's some very clear research, and my experience would back this up, that unless you're linking goals to reward in an effective way, you're not going to be successful in motivating the teams, which ultimately helps to deliver high performance. And so it's important that your performance management system is very tightly linked to your goals process. And where I've seen this work most effectively, and the teams perform the best, is when there is a collective responsibility for the project team goals, for all of them. So what I've seen work really well is in companies that that basically insist that every individual on a team takes the entire set of project team goals as personal goals, and they're rewarded based on that. So in my view, that is really helpful into driving everyone in the same direction and delivering. Time is running away with me again, but again, it would be, I couldn't really do a presentation like this without mentioning leadership. Leadership's really, really important. I haven't got time to talk about it, but I recently came across a really helpful framework from Fulham on leadership, which really summarizes a lot of my observations about what good leaders do in terms of leading high performance teams. And so I encourage you to just go and have a look at that. And I think as we discussed earlier, project success factors are really important. There are clearly conditions within which high performing project teams thrive and perform, but there are wider organizational and environmental factors that you need to be aware of, because they do affect project success. It's creating that environment for successful projects that's so important. So we've covered a number of items on this list that the Association for Project Management put together, but there are a number of items that we haven't really had time to discuss, like effective governance, like securing funding, things like project planning, and I guess it's fairly obvious, but proven methods and tools. All of these things are really important for generating project success, which obviously is key for our businesses. So that's been a very rapid walkthrough of what I think are the most important factors in developing high performance teams. And I think I'll just leave you with a summary of what we've talked about. Remember those key features that high performing teams possess. Think about project team size. Think about the importance of developing those good relationships, the importance of goal setting and the link to reward, leadership, the models that I mentioned that normally get covered, the project success factors. And remember that building a high-performing team is a marathon, it's not a sprint. And with that, I can take any questions.
Thank you, Tom. Great presentation. I have a question from Mike Myers. You can see the questions on the stage chat. Tom, can you please expand on the continuous learning point? What in your mind does good look like here on the continuous learning point?
That's a very important point. I think, I don't know what other companies do, but certainly a number of the companies that I've worked with will do lessons learned at different milestone points in projects. And I think it's really important that they don't just sit on the shelf, because I've seen that in certain companies. They go away, they have a nice project team session in a nice venue. They do a lessons learned exercise, they write it up, and then it just goes hidden somewhere. It needs to be shared. And I think where I've seen it work best is when that lessons learned is presented to senior management. So clearly the whole entire learning can't be presented, but what I've done in the past is presented the really top, maybe 5 items in terms of lessons learned to a senior management committee and said, we need your approval to implement these. And that's worked really well, because these are real lessons. And then it's not just applying to one project. The visibility is there because all those presentations are shared and other teams are encouraged to get on board with the learnings. So that to me works really well.
Mike also mentioned that, we work in a space that is often treated as highly confidential. Sometimes it minimizes sharing the tough lessons learned. So it's not easy to share something if it's confidential. And it's hard, I guess, to say that it happened in a different company when it's lessons learned you've already mentioned. So thank you. Barbara McGregor asked, are there any pointers how to develop and nurture a high-performing team when you have many team members working on multiple projects and therefore may have different priorities?
Yeah, no, that's a very, very important point, because we do work in an industry where people are working on multiple projects and they're pulled in different directions. I think the only thing I can say is that by working with people and developing those relationships, it's absolutely critical to get commitment from people, and work and really getting alongside people, understanding what their challenges are, because we all know that individual workload can be peaks and troughs, and it's just working with the team to make sure you're alongside all the team members, understand where they're at in terms of their workloads and personal life, and the challenges they're facing, so that you can basically get through it together. And I find if you develop those personal relationships, you're much more likely to get commitments and the team to remain high performing.
Okay, thank you. Nicole asked, if you keep core teams really small in complex projects, such as drug development, how do you ensure continuous engagement of the wider team of all the functions required to bring a drug to the market?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair point. I think in our industry, and certainly the companies that I've worked in, you basically have a core team, but you have lots of sub teams, which are basically led by the people who are on the core team. So they represent all of those functions. So they're working with their own teams. For example, the clinical team, the CMC team, regulatory team. So they all meet separately to the core team, and they bring back to the core team progress. And it's the only way really to maintain in very complex projects. And I worked on Avastin, which had 5 teams with a franchise team. That's incredibly complex. But the only way is to have small teams if you're going to do it well. You just have to have layers of teams that are highly coordinated. We used to meet every single Monday morning as a franchise team to ensure communication, because communication is obviously critical to make sure that everyone knows what's going on.
Okay, thank you. Question from Jakil. Given the current COVID-imposed work environment, where many team members may never have met face-to-face, what tips do you have to build up team spirit, camaraderie, team building?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, we're obviously all going through this one right now, but I am concerned about the long-term effects of remote connection with team members, because that ultimately nothing takes the place of face-to-face. But we have to work in the current environment with the technology that we have. So I think for me, it's just having those informal call-ups with people. So you just setting regular catch-ups with people, and having social chats, not just business chats, is really important. These virtual coffee sessions is really important to maintain the informal social connection with people. I find works well, but it's for me, it's no substitute ultimately for face-to-face connection. When we were able to, for some members of my team based in the UK, we would go in and meet just to maintain that connection. But currently that simply isn't possible. So I think it is incredibly difficult, I think, to counteract that but we just have to use the technology that we have available to try and do the best we can. So I don't claim to have that one sorted by any means, and I don't think it's optimal. And that's one of my concerns ultimately about the current environment that we're in, is that I think it is putting incredible strain on teams by not having that face-to-face social connection.
So you think it's harder to have the distant connections?
I think so, because some people are very touchy-feely and they need that connection. So, you do get concerned about people's mental state when they're remote connected. And, we've introduced counselors within our organization for people to talk to, because some people really struggle without that, social contact, because that's the sort of personality they are. They're very gregarious. They need people around them, and they're just not able to have that at the moment. So, a number of people in the team do struggle with that, and you've got to know who they are and try and make more time to connect with them, because many people are struggling with their mental health at the moment, and the other pressures like homeschooling kids and other things that are going on. So there's lots of stresses on people that you really need to empathize with and work with the individuals if you're going to maintain performance in teams.
So I agree that the working environment is meant for work. Home environment is meant for being with family and having relax. And are there any tips on celebrating the success remotely? Question from Laura Patton.
Yeah, that's another.
I like it.
It's another work in progress, I think. But I know that there are a number of teams. We haven't got to the milestones where we would celebrate at the moment in the teams that I'm working currently with. But I've heard of teams doing, virtual wine tastings, virtual cookery. So it seems to work. Apparently, I've never actually used it myself, but apparently the teams that have tried it, particularly the virtual cookery, apparently works quite well. So the wine tasting I'd probably go for. But yeah, some of these ideas to do things virtually, or there are a number of, as you would expect, team building companies that have gone into the virtual world. So there are some games that can be done virtually. So I don't particularly want to call that any one company, but I was looking at one the other day that thinking further ahead, if we continue in the virtual world, what might be helpful? And there's a whole range of things out there for team building virtually. But I don't want to comment on them as how good they are because I've got no personal experience. But I mentioned the wine tasting and the cooking because I know people who have done that and have found it very helpful for their teams.
Thank you. Cookery looks good. I think it's more healthier than drinking remotely. I had a developer 6 years ago. He actually invented the drinking on remote with his friend. But I think this is not the way. Susan Sengens mentioned that they have sent small gifts, chocolate cakes, and also organized online get-togethers and played games like bingo over the Teams.
Yeah.
So
yeah, certainly as a UK site, we've done things like that. So pub quizzes and things like that remotely, I think helps the general connection to do those informal social things. Definitely helps.
And Nicole also mentioned that virtual pub quiz and cookie baking sessions are also a possible way.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. If there are any questions, just write it down. Tom and I will ask you. Okay. So thank you very much, Tom, for great presentation. I was impressed. It was really a lot of information. I never thought that there are so many things about high-performing teams. And now over to Simona, who will tell you more about networking.
Thanks. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom, for the wealth of information that you shared. And thank you, Peter, for the words. So the next part of the program, so-called network break. What you do then, the drill if you are part of the previous break. So what you can do is that you can join networking sessions where you'll get connected to random person for 20 to 180 seconds, which is 3 minutes. So you can just share some little bit about yourself, or you can organize a special session just for you to talk longer. Or you can join the sessions, which are actually breakout rooms or roundtables. The first break, there was only Q&A session that was available for everybody who wants to ask further questions to the speakers or to other delegates. So this is a space where you can elaborate on the topics discussed in the presentations that were running previously. And I added 2 more sessions to this round, where you can discuss the role of PMOs and the inside out of strategy, how to leverage it and optimize for operational excellence. So those are 3 sessions or 3 breakout rooms where you can meet other professionals like you. Or I'd like to point out we've got also expo sessions where my colleagues will tell you more about the upcoming masterclasses led by 2 key leaders on the market. Antonio Nieto Rodriguez, who presented today in the morning, and he will be running a masterclass on Project Revolution. Or you can find out more information on masterclass about decision analysis by Dr. Richard Bailey, who is the absolute veteran and expert in the industry. So make sure you go check it out. I'm pretty sure you can get very nice discount from my colleagues when you join. And then there is the last expo booth, which will be run by me. I will be introducing our very own platform called PPM Workout. It's a community platform where you can grow your impact, can connect with the professionals, you can meet thought leaders, and you can join daily webinars, which will be run Monday till Thursday, 3 p.m. UK time. And I already saw that we've got some new members from this session, which is amazing. So make sure to check it out. It's a subscription-based platform, but there's 2 months free trial. And for all the members of this community, we provide access to the virtual conferences free of charge. So you lose nothing, but there's a lot to win. You can build relationships, you can discuss the pressing challenges and the opportunities in the market. So make sure to go check it out. I'll be waiting for you in the expo booth where I can run a demonstration of the platform before you decide to join. So I'm going to be there in 3 minutes. So go grab a coffee or tea, and it will be a very short 10 minutes demonstration. Or, yeah, choose your networking break wisely, and I'll see you later on for the next session, which will be at 1:30 UK time, and it's a panel discussion on involving senior management in PPM. So see you later, and see you in the booth for the PPM workout.